And we're live. Good morning, everyone. Good day, good night, good evening to everyone who is part of this webinar today. My name is Herns. I'm the Cloud and Enterprise Business Lead for Microsoft Philippines, and welcome to another edition of the Azure Weekly Webinars. Our topic for today is Azure Management and Governance. So what we're going to be talking about today is the approach and the different tools that our customers and Azure users usually use to manage and govern their current Azure installation. So a few ground rules again before we start the actual webinar proper. This entire webinar is recorded from beginning to end. If you join this webinar late, for instance, or if you miss some part of this webinar, don't worry about it. In about 24 or 48 hours after the end of this webinar, you will receive an email with a link to the recording of this webinar. So you can listen to this webinar and view the slides and look at the content at your own pace, using your own device, anytime that you want, as long as that recording link is still available. There is also a question and answer or a Q&A box at the bottom of your existing in the webinar interface of your browser. So if you have any questions that pop up into your head during the conduct of this webinar, just put it in the question and answer and then the Q&A box, and we will try to answer your question during the webinar itself. And if in case you still have any questions after this webinar and you're not able to get any answers during the webinar itself, you can send me an email at hrmida@microsoft.com. All right, so let's get going. All right, so in every Azure implementation, we always espouse and talk to our customers about adopting what is called a cloud adoption framework for Azure. So this is like a one-slide summary of what the cloud adoption framework is for Azure. We will have another webinar in the future that discusses the cloud adoption framework for Azure at length, but I just wanted to use this as a jumping point to explain the two main parts, the two important parts that we want to cover for today. So anyway, when you start, the cloud adoption framework basically is telling us that if we want to go to the cloud, we need to first define the strategy and then define the plan, including skills readiness and making your team ready for the cloud. As far as skills is concerned, the cloud adoption plan. Then making ourselves ready by landing the first zone, expanding the footprint, or expanding the blueprint, best practice validation, and so on. And then we then proceed to either migrate workloads to the cloud or innovate by adding new applications or converting existing applications to the cloud. What I wanted to spend more time on is this part right here, the govern and the manage part. So govern basically means that we want to establish a proven methodology in terms of how you are governing all the resources and how we use Azure once we go mainstream with Azure, establishing benchmark, putting up best practices, and also making sure that we reach a level of maturity as far as governance is concerned. Manage means managing business commitments because as IT professionals or IT managers, whenever we use Azure, we are actually managing applications or backends on behalf of the business or the business decision makers or the business owner. So we have commitments that we have met with them, establishing operational baseline and also going towards a certain level of operational maturity. So everything that we're going to be talking about here today is going to be around govern and manage. The previous webinars or the previous webinars or the next set of webinars have talked about getting ourselves ready, and also the migration and the innovation part. These are the different sets of Azure management and governance tools. So if you go to azure.com and then select the product selection, and if you click on management, you will see here different sets of Azure services or products that are typically used to manage or govern your Azure infrastructure. So this goes from using the portal, Azure Advisor, Cost Management, Policy, Azure Monitor Scheduler, and if you want to know more, you can click on the See More button so that you can see the other services here. So because of the limited time that we have on this webinar, we won't be able to cover all of the management and governance tools, but we will certainly cover the more important ones. Here's a handy guide that will help us make decisions or if we are confused as to which tools we are going to use to implement what. If you're viewing the recording of this webinar, you may want to pause at this point and read through this entire slide. So The main interface for us to manage all Azure services and do configuration and control is actually the Azure portal. If we want to streamline administration with the browser-based shell, then we have Azure Cloud Shell. If we want to implement server backup to the cloud, then we have Azure Backup. If let's say you want to simplify how we manage our application resources, we have a tool called Azure Resource Manager. So I don't want to go through this entire list, but this is just to go to show, just to show a guided list, if you will, of everything that you need for management and governance. So the first thing and the most common interface that people use to administer every service in Azure is called the Azure portal. So accessing the Azure portal is quite simple. Just go to azure.com. On the upper right hand corner, you log in using the user account that you have just used to log into to register your Azure subscription. And on the left side, this is where you have all the common tools that you would need. For example, different app services, configuration of different databases. So all the services are organized according to these icons. Usually, the first thing that you will see is a dashboard, if you will, of all the status of all your resources within easy reach. For those for those who are used to the shell interface, or even for those who are not used to the shell interface, please note that there are some administration and governance capabilities of Azure that are better suited, that are better administered or better applied using PowerShell scripting. To do that, we have something called Azure Cloud Shell. This is an interactive browser accessible shell for managing Azure resources. So this is where you enter your PowerShell commands. So you have an interface here in the Azure portal, and in the Azure mobile app, you also have an Cloud Shell as well. So you can run your PowerShell scripts here to do standard administration, or even create automation scripts to automate certain tasks within the Azure administration. So you use common tools and programming languages. Again, usually it's PowerShell. You persist your files across sessions in attached Azure files. So that's Azure PowerShell. Now, another tool that is used by a lot of people, and I put this front and center, is Azure Advisor. So take a look at a scenario wherein you already have implemented a lot of stuff on Azure. So for example, you've already migrated your virtual machines from on-premise to the cloud, or you've created new virtual machines, you've installed your applications, you've created a number of applications using platform as a services or PaaS services like web apps. You've deployed your containers, managed it using Kubernetes services, and so on and so forth. The Azure Advisor becomes sort of your free advisor for optimizing your use of Azure. So as an overview, Azure Advisor is a tool that allows you to optimize resources for high availability, security, performance, and cost. It also gives you personalized recommendations. It also accesses best practice optimizations at no additional costs. There are four main areas that Advisor gives us advice on: high availability, to increase availability of your business critical apps in Azure; security, to better protect your Azure resources; performance, to boost the speed and responsiveness of your resources; and finally, cost, to maximize the return of your Azure investment. So think of Azure Advisor again as a personalized 24 by 7, 365 days a year available tool that watches over everything that you run in Azure and constantly gives you recommendations on how to increase your high availability, improve your security, improve your performance, and lower down your cost. I have here a few screenshots of what Advisor looks like. This may be different from what you are looking at right now because it's been some time since I've done screen caps from Advisor, but the whole point here is I just wanted to walk you through some basic capabilities of Azure Advisor so you can try to explore them yourselves if you already have an Azure subscription. So the advisor, the first thing that you will see once you turn on advisor is that you will see here the number of recommendations that the system has found out and are trying to make recommendations for you according to the four different categories that was mentioned a while ago. So in this example, I have here's an example of 9 recommendations on high availability, 20 recommendations in security, 3 recommendations of performance, and 1 recommendation to reduce your cost. It will also even tell you which of these recommendations that you may want to put big attention to, because it is going to be highly impacting the way you're operating your Azure capabilities now. It also gives you an indication of what are the impacted resources. If you want to download those recommendations, you can do it via PDF or you can do it via CSV. Of course, you can actually take a look at the details once you click on one of the boxes. So let's take a look at some examples of high availability recommendations. So when you click on high availability, here's an example of what it shows. So for example, it shows here a high impact recommendations that says use manage this to improve data reliability, mainly because the system probably has found out that you have certain applications or VMs that are using standard disks or disk storage of lower tier, and then it was able to discover that a lot of the applications and the data that you're running there seem to be very important, and therefore makes a recommendation for you to use managed disks. It also, again, shows you what are the impacted resources. But there are also other recommendations that are medium, for example. So let's say, for example, you want to add more virtual machines to improve fault tolerance. So maybe they found a certain set of virtual machines that are being used frequently, but they don't have any DR capabilities, or is not replicated across another region. So the system is basically making a recommendation. In order to approve the high availability of this application, you may want to use or you may want to click on you may want to do some fault tolerance capabilities. The other thing here that's interesting is that you notice this is actually a URL. If you click this URL, it will actually give you the recommendation in detail. So the recommendation in detail would show you stuff like, for example, what are the virtual machines that are affected, and what are the recommended actions, and so on. So if you click on one of the recommended actions, it will actually give you, well, I don't have a slide for that, I'm sorry, but it will actually give you the details of what you need to do, from the steps of how you configure that virtual machine in accordance to the advisory. Okay, now let's take a look at some of the things that Azure Advisor gives in terms of recommendations for security. So this is an example. So if you click on the security tab, it will show you, for example, in this case, I have 20 recommendations. All of them are high impact, and the number of impacted resources 182, and all the other details. If you want to look at what the description of each of the recommendations are, click on this one, and it will automatically redirect you to a tool called Azure Security Center, which will then give you all these details. Like, for example, you can see here in the screen that it is giving you a recommendation to enable multi-factor authentication for accounts with right permissions to your subscription. Let's say another one, say enable auditing on SQL servers, because the system actually found out that you have 4 SQL servers that don't have auditing turned on. The severity is quite high. So you may want to turn on auditing so that you can find out what users are actually doing on those SQL servers. There are also a set of performance recommendations. Let's take a look at that. So here's an example. There are a total of 3 recommendations. 2 of them are high impact. So you may want to, for example, here, in this case, configure your DNS TTL to 20 seconds. And of course, at this point, you already know the drill. If you click on the description, it will show you another page that shows you the actual steps on how to do configuration of DNS. In some cases, if it requires the running of a script or a PowerShell command, the PowerShell command is actually given in that particular page. All you need to do is just run a cut and paste or do a little bit of customization to suit your environment. So here's an example. Performance recommendations. For this one is particularly for a database. So it's saying that you may want to create an index, and then gives you more details as to which table and what index columns. It even shows you the tuning history. Like in this case, you may be using a managed SQL service. So it's actually saying that these are the things that it has done for tuning to improve the performance. And then finally, cost recommendations. So here's on the same example. If you click on the cost tab, it will tell you that right size or shut down underutilized virtual machines. So that's an example. So if you click on the description, it will even tell you which virtual machines are recommended to be scaled down or even turned off. And the potential monthly savings that you will get in this case is about $5,800. And again, like I said a while ago, it will give you a list of all these virtual machines. Here's one of the recommendations would be either resize the virtual machine or either shut down the virtual machine. So if you click on shut down the virtual machine, it'll give you the exact instructions on how to do that. You can even say click on view usage patterns. So the next page on this one will show you what are the peaks and valleys of usage for these virtual machines across a 30-day period. Okay, so this is a more details from the previous screen. You can select what metrics you want to see, and then you can actually see it in the graph on this right side on what are the peak usage, so that you can make a very informed decision on whether you want to reduce the virtual machine size or simply shut it down to reduce cost. Okay, all right. So managing cloud spend across the organization also becoming increasingly important, because the funny thing about it is that most customers are actually wanting to go to the cloud to save on costs. But the reality is there are sometimes customers who move too much to the cloud or using the cloud in a non-optimal manner, in which case it would actually give this false impression or even a true impression that the cloud is more expensive than on-prem. So in order for us to make sure that our IT executives have a better understanding of how we are spending for cloud across the company, we have a number of cost management tools that we made available for you on Azure. This same tools also is used to make sure that our finance teams are able to, for example, improve forecast accuracy, and our business units to learn how to optimize their cloud units so that they can even show a stronger ROI. So cost management, when we released this product about a year and a half to 2 years ago, on the average, our customers see an improvement of cloud efficiency by 20 to 25% within 3 to 6 months of using this service. So with cost management, you can, first of all, monitor your cloud spend. So if anybody asks you on the day or on the hour, how much are we spending on Azure today, you'll be able to give them an answer. You can also drive organizational accountability. So we've seen a lot of enterprise customers or larger customers, for example, having a single subscription on Azure, but they want to be able to do cross-charging or internal charging within departments of usage of the cloud. And we also can use cost management to optimize cloud efficiency. So here's an example of how you monitor cloud spend. You can look at tracking usage and costing trends. You can even detect spending anomalies. So you'll get an alert, for example, if a certain resource is going over a certain amount or is unusually high in terms of usage. You can also forecast future spending. This is particularly useful for customers who have a sort of a fixed budget every month or a fixed budget every year in terms of how they pay for cloud. And you can visualize all of this data in graph format. So here's an example of what it looks like if you put in, for example, a budget, and it will compare it against your actual spending or usage of the cloud. You can also monitor cost over time. Like I said, you can also drive organizational accountability. So for example, you can allocate usage and cost to business units and project, producing chargeback and showback reports, and then give it to your finance teams for proper internal charging or internal book expensing. You can also let teams to access data and insights with role-based access control. So for example, one department's IT department can actually only view their data, but not the entire organizations. And you can also automatically alert stakeholders if they're overspending risks or if they're going over the spending limit. So here's an example of a chargeback report. It looks pretty simple, but you can download this immediately in the form of a PDF or a Word document, or you can even download the raw data and then create graphs in Excel or in Power BI. This is where you set the alerts in terms of what type of alerts you want to see and when it comes to spending. And then finally, is optimizing cloud efficiency. So it's tied up to the Azure Advisor. So that's why a lot of our customers are using both Azure Cost Management and Advisor, because cost management is actually getting inputs from Azure Advisor. So when Azure Advisor start looking at all of the usage logs, it will report back to you in the form of a cost optimization recommendations for example, help you make decisions on increasing resource utilization for VM right sizing, eliminating idle resources, and it will even make recommendations on whether it makes sense for you to do reserved instances, meaning you pay upfront for certain virtual machines to get a significant discount instead of paying for it as you use it. So you can see here another report that says unattached disks. So even if you're not, this is an example of a set of resources which you really shouldn't be paying for, but it's out there, and you maybe not don't know about this, that you're incurring charges for. Reserve instances purchase impact also shows you here what is going to be your potential savings if you do reserve instances instead of paying as you go. So how does Azure Cost Management work? First of all, it is a built-in capability of Azure that you can access through the portal to turn on. You can do role-based access control. You can assign administrators or even users or groups to be able to view certain reports or do certain functionality within Azure Cost Management. You can collect. The more important thing here is that there's a capability here to collect the data, the raw data or the usage data, in order for advisor and cost management to make recommendations. For Azure, it's free, but there are also that you also have the capability of doing Azure cost or cost management for other clouds as well, such as AWS and GCP. This is, for example, for you customers who are using all three clouds or any of these two clouds, you can definitely use Azure Cost Management to monitor your cost on other clouds as well, and maybe perhaps compare that with what you're using for Azure, and then you give the same capabilities such as giving organizations their own bill of the usage of AWS and other clouds together with that of Azure. All right, now the next tool that I'd like to cover is something called Azure Policy. Now, why is governance important? Policy and governance. So we are under pressure to digitally transform, innovate. We need the agility. At the same time, we need the agility to speed to market. And this is the reason why we are going to the cloud, because we want to spin up applications as quickly as possible using the DevOps and Agile methodology. Sometimes when you let this go, and if there's no governance or very little governance, what is the result is cloud. What is something called cloud sprawl? You have increased complexity. We now have difficulty in managing standards and accountabilities, compliance, and consistent architecture at cost. So in order for us to solve this, we have to create policies. But the traditional approach kind of looks this way. In a typical organization that has IT, you would have operations who would run your cloud and your on-premise infrastructure, and you have developers who would create applications using the resources managed by your operations. You would have someone like a cloud custodian or an engineer that's responsible for the cloud environment, and the job of this person is to make sure that the operations and the developers get what they want. In cloud native governance, we are trying to remove the barriers to compliance and enabling velocity by enabling some form of control on the cloud, that is the policy of which is defined by the cloud custodian team, so that when a developer starts asking for resources, the developer does not simply get all the resources, because you have defined the policy that basically limits what the developers can or cannot get. So the need to govern, if your team runs an Azure environment with, here's an example as to when we need to govern. You have a team you're in an environment that has multiple engineering teams, multiple subscriptions. You need to standardize and enforce how cloud resources are configured, and due to regulatory compliance, cost control, or security or design consistency, you need to establish some form of governance in place. So sometimes the reason why you need to have governance is for a practical reason. You want to establish standards, like for example, a typical development server shouldn't be a large size virtual machines, but rather a limited size virtual machine. So you don't want the developers to go crazy and suddenly start provisioning for themselves large virtual machines. But at the same time, you do not want to stifle the speed to market of the developers by giving by controlling all of these resources from a central point, and thus the need to govern. So this is where Azure Policy comes in. This is for enterprise level compliance. It does basically three things. One is enforcement and compliance. So you turn on policies or build custom ones. You can create real-time policy evaluation or enforcement. And you can also do periodic and on-demand compliance evaluation. So an example would be, for example, GDPR or GDPR standards. So in Azure Policy, we already have a set of GDPR compatible standards that you can simply apply in the form of a template. So everything that you do in Azure, from provisioning of resources to usage of resources, is governed by the policy that you have just applied. And you can also evaluate and enforce these policies in real time. You can also apply these policies at scale because you can do it through a management group, through an entire organization. You can apply or have multiple policies and apply these policies cross-department or cross-functions within your organization. And then if you have any policy violations, once you get that alert that a certain user, for example, is trying to get a resource that is not compatible with the policy that you have just applied for his or her group, you can definitely remediate that in real time as well. So this is the view from a governance standpoint. So if you're the cloud custodian or the ones that define the policy and monitor the policy of the usage of the cloud, this is what you see. You can see certain number of initiatives that are non-compliant, what policies are non-compliant, and what resources are non-compliant. And then you can apply the specific you can apply the specific policies on those resources. If you are a developer, this is what you are going to see. Here's an example of what you're going to see. So if you're a developer, you go and say, for example, you need to deploy an application for testing, and therefore you need a virtual machine. So you go to the portal using your own account and define or create a new virtual machine. So let's say this virtual machine, you defined it on your own. You did not use any resource templates. You just created one on your own. So what happens here is that if the created virtual machine violates a policy that has been established, you will see here that the validation has failed because you are using, in this case, you are actually creating a virtual machine that is not allowed for developers. So the way it works is that you have a centralized control plane being managed by Azure Resource Management, and then you have Azure Policy here, which is the one that controls or monitors everything that you do in Azure to make sure that you are compliant with certain with the policies that you have set. So once a user creates a configuration, a request or a resource request, Azure Policy is checked. Okay, and then what happens is that you are given the resource if you are compatible with the policy, and if you're not compatible with the policy, then your resource request is then not allowed. So let's take the case of that your configuration request actually is compliant with the policy, and therefore Azure Portal will then assign you those resources immediately. So the cloud resource is then given to you. So following the example that I just shared a while ago, when you create the virtual machine, and if it's within the policy that was set for developers creating virtual machine, then you will now get access to that virtual machine. So how do you define policies? So essentially, at the root of it, policies are defined through a PowerShell script. So this is an example of a policy where that when applied is not allowing creation of resource without a cost center defined. So this is an example of, let's say, you want a policy where if anybody creates anything on Azure, there has to be a cost center because you want Azure Cost Management to pick up that tag. So the actual usage of that resource can be charged against that particular cost center. Here's another example of how enforcing naming conventions. Here's another example of enforcing SKUs of basic A series. So allowed VM SKUs is the name of the policy. And then you're basically defining a policy that once invoked will only allow the users to create a series virtual machines, A0, A1, A2, A3, and A4. So typically you would have a collection of all of these policies. You don't have to create these from scratch, by the way. Most of them are actually on GitHub that you can get. There's a policy definition library over there. You may want to in the future study some of these policies and pick the ones that are closest to the one that you want to implement, and then make customizations later on. So here's another example, forcing a convention on how to use on not how to use but how to define resource names. The policy repository can be found on GitHub. I'm supposed to have the URL here, but it's in GitHub. You can download here some policy examples. So here's the URL. Okay, so then therefore it allows you to create management groups for enterprises. So you can organizationally align your Azure subscriptions to custom hierarchies. So you may have, for example, if you are a large corporation and you have multiple sets of IT departments, you may have different policies for different IT departments that govern the way they create resources on Azure or how they manage these resources on Azure. It also enables the targeting of policies and span budgets across the subscriptions inheritance down to hierarchies. So if you set a policy, for example, on the topmost hierarchy over here, everybody else here in the bottom will inherit those policies unless you create a policy that overrides the previous one. Okay, now another tool that that is typically used for governance is something called Azure Monitor. Now, in a nutshell, Azure Monitor is a collection of everything that is used in Azure to look at all the logs that's been generated by virtually every app, every virtual machine, every database. And then you've got a layer of artificial intelligence and you've got a layer of automation to take a look at these logs and then shows you a summary of all of this, of everything so that you can monitor your resources and the usage of these resources in real time. So typically what our customer says, what they need for cloud computing is three things. First, of course, is visibility. You need to get access to a foundational set of metrics, alerts, and notifications. Not only do you need to get visibility because most of the time you will be overwhelmed with the sheer volume of data that you're going to get from monitoring systems, but also insights, recommendations in a sense, or rich analytics to diagnose your applications, compute, storage, and network resources. So that you don't have to diagnose these problems yourselves. Azure will actually make recommendations on how to fix these if before these problems even arises. And the third thing is monitoring should also be allowing us to make decisions on how to further optimize our usage of the cloud. So the challenge of monitoring in the cloud era, you can see it here. So if you're seeing the recording of this webinar, you can pause at this point and read all of them. But let's pick a few of them. The real reason why we want to monitor most of the time is we want to meet SLAs. We have a commitment to the business users that their applications and their data will be available at a certain amount of time. So how do we know if we are going to meet or we're going to miss those SLAs? We need monitoring for that. It's not just about diagnosing problems, but it's also how do you understand and optimize the performance of your applications, because now you can afford to continuously make improvements on the way your applications are working and how they are performing because of these automated tools, because you don't have to worry about patching because you are on the cloud. So how can Azure help? So it's a combination of Azure Monitor, Log Analytics, and Application Insights, but for simplicity's sake, let's all collectively refer them as Azure Monitor. It will give insights to IT and developers. So from a DevOps standpoint, it will give you visibility on how users are actually using and interacting with your applications. It will also allow us to reduce the mean time to detect issues because you don't need to read logs after the fact. The logs are already being read by the system and it's being displayed to you. It's not just being displayed to you in its raw form, but also the insights and the analytics out of the logs is also being displayed to you. You can also increase your value to the organization by providing a proactive response, because the monitor tool in combination with Azure Advisor and other tools that are of similar nature will tell you, hey, you know what, something is about to go wrong with your application, so therefore you need to fix it before something really happens. So these things would include responding alerts to immediately fine-tuning applications based on analytics of the actual usage of the application. So Azure Monitor gives you full stack visibility. So it can be anywhere between network to CPU to memory leaks and to even specific code within applications or even some packaged applications. AI is also embedded within Azure Monitor. It takes a look at all the logs and then not just only displays in nice looking graphical formats, but also makes predictions to a certain extent on what will happen on certain parameters that you are monitoring. Proactive optimization means identifying potential bottlenecks and new ways to improve your application. This is also very open and extensible. It has out-of-the-box integration with popular DevOps platforms, issue management, ITSM, and even SIEM tools, whether it's Azure Sentinel or something outside of the Microsoft ecosystem. Azure Monitor can definitely integrate with those so that you can use your single scene view to view what's going on in Azure along with your other systems in your IT infrastructure. So Monitor looks like this. This dashboard is fully configurable. The things that matter, the things that are most important to you, you can display it up front on the dashboard. The steps are as follows. It collects the data, it visualizes the data, it analyzes the data, and gives you end-to-end views across your application and infra. It allows you to proactively respond, and again, it will allow you to integrate through APIs and SDKs to other DevOps, ITSM, and SIE tools. So this is what it looks like architecturally. You've got your logs from your applications, OS, Azure resources, subscription, tenant, and even custom sources, other clouds, etc. They usually go into a single repository for metrics and the raw logs. These are stored, and then these are then subjected to analysis, to alerts, to integration points. For example, in this case, we're using event hubs. So, for example, if an alert happens, instead of just giving you a visual alert in your Azure portal, you can actually use the Event Hub to trigger an alert in some third-party application. Of course, you have different ways to visualize this, such as the built-in dashboards, views in Power BI, and the insights there as well. So this is like a simplistic view of how you look at it. The metrics will be displayed to you in the form of graphs, and the logs will be displayed here in the form of tabular format. If you want to search through the logs, you can also do that as well. I apologize if the screen is very small, but you can actually enter the search criteria here and become very granular if you want. Application Insights is also a great tool that is part of Azure Monitor. Application Insights, as the name implies, gives you insights and also allows you to understand how users are using and interacting with the applications you have deployed on Azure. So an example would be let's say you have a mobile application that you created and then you deployed this on the mobile web app service of Azure. So initially, it is very efficient. It's fast. People love it. They're accessing the application. But over time, you need to be able to monitor things such as how do people log in? Where do they log in from? What devices are they using? Which page in your mobile application do they spend the most time most time at? Which functionality in your mobile application does it seem to be spending a lot of time querying the server and the database? So that may be an opportunity for you to further optimize that application. Containers can also be now monitored using Azure Monitor. So as we see the shift of customers moving applications from monolithic applications and putting them into containers, there is a specific module within the Azure Monitor that allows you to kind of monitor the same stuff, but you're monitoring it not just as a single application, but as a container. There's a specific capability for monitoring virtual machines as well. So here's some monitoring solutions. So yeah, what do I? Oh yeah, this dashboard is also another example of how you can configure Azure Monitor. You can so now here's a combination of different capabilities. You're now not just monitoring applications, but you're also monitoring backups and anti-malware. So you can actually combine all of these from different elements within Azure. So alerts, this is a screenshot of what alerts you're going to get in Azure Monitor. I apologize if this looks generic. I just wanted to show you a screenshot as to what it typically looks like. So here's another example of monitoring, but this is more of using Azure Monitor, and it is more application centric rather than infrastructure centric. So in here, as you can see, you're monitoring the application itself, the number of failed requests, the server response time. So it's a very, very application-centric type of monitoring approach rather than infrastructure. You can view specific logs if you want to. You can be as granular as you want. You can view the logs as the application is live and as users are accessing, or you can do it later. Then you also import all of that raw information through APIs through Power BI, and you can use Power BI and create your own custom visualizations or summary visualizations anyway. So for example, if you want to report back to your business as to how users are using your applications or any type of any type of resource that can be monitored in Azure, and make a general report that is not really refreshable every day. Okay, you just want to give your IT and your business decision makers a dashboard to look at, then you can use Power BI. You can choose a full stack monitoring solution. So similar to Azure Cost Monitoring, you can do it. You can monitor everything on Azure, but you can also monitor AWS and other clouds as well. So now you have a single pane of glass and a single monitoring system to monitor everything in across all your clouds that you're currently using. So with Azure, you have Azure Monitor, Log Analytics, Applications Insights, Network Watcher. We haven't talked about that. I'll cover that later. And then if you're not happy with any of these tools, we definitely have a number of other partners which already are plugged into Azure that you can subscribe to or purchase on the marketplace. These are some of these customers. So one particular example is Dynatrace and Splunk. So both of these have already pre-configured plugins into Azure that will give you detail that is specific only to Splunk that you can only see on Splunk and on Dynatrace. All right, another tool that we have added into your toolbox of monitoring and proper governance is Azure Network Watcher. Now, why did we create Network Watcher? Because oftentimes when customers are deploying stuff on Azure, you'd have to configure networks, right? So you have logical demarcations, if you will, between your different resources, applications, databases. You define your own DMZs across different regions and so on and so forth. So you'd have to monitor the flow of traffic inside or outside your VNets and all of these logical network divisions. So with Network Watcher, you can get insights into your network traffic using flow logs. You can monitor you can do network monitoring and do packet capture, and you can also diagnose VPN connectivity issues between regions or between Azure to your own data centers. Uh, Again, we also have other partners such as McAfee, Splunk, Sumo Logic, Redlock, Observable Networks, and many others that can add a functionality into Azure Network Watcher to complement it or even replace it if you want. But because this is an Azure webinar, I'm going to talk more about Azure Network Watcher. So this is kind of what it looks like. So again, I have a set of screenshots that will illustrate and give you an idea on how this works. So say, for example, you have a network resource. You can actually specify a target machine with this associated network group, and you can run inbound and outbound packet capture. So what you're trying to do here is you are going to do inbound and outbound network packet capture across multiple IP addresses in a single subscription. So once you run once you run the network packet capture, you can select the virtual network interface and the virtual machine and the virtual network interface, and then and again put in some rules if you want to, like inbound and outbound rules as to what you want to monitor, or and then select the next hop and what you want to do with that. So maybe it's a appliance. Enter destination address, enter route pool, okay, and then from once you've set everything that, now you can start doing the packet capture. You can start doing the packet capture from the things that you've set up a while ago. And then once you've already done the packet capture, in this case, it will ask you if you want to download the .cap. If you open that, it will show you via Wireshark what the captured packets are. So I hope in that very short demonstration, I just wanted to give you this idea that in order for you to capture packets for resources, for communication across resources or VNets within your Azure, within your Azure tenant. Azure Network Watcher is the tool to use that. But in this case, this is an example of, again, using Wireshark to look at the actual packets that were captured. And then you can then start diagnosing any problems in your network. So once you see what the problems are from the packet capture, then you can go to the, say, the VNet configuration of what's causing the problems and make the changes. You can also do NSG flow logs if you would like. Okay. So here's an example. So here's another screenshot of how you figure that. Using Network Watcher, you can also monitor network traffic that goes across containers. Again, same concept. Configure the policies and configure what you want to try to capture. Then run the Azure Network Watcher to do the actual capture. So here's an example of how you would use Power BI if once you already got the NSG flow logs. In this case, it was put in a storage account in Azure. So just go to Power BI and using the Power BI connectivity tools, connect to the storage account and then load it. Once you've loaded the data, then you can start creating your dashboards to see network traffic flow across multiple containers or multiple devices. Enter the account key. There you go. So that's a great example of, this is a good example of how it is actually reading, or how Power BI is reading raw network data from NSG flows that you've just set up on Azure Network Watch. Okay, so another question that we often get, especially for Azure newbies, is how do we monitor the health of our Azure subscription? So for example, someone told you and tapped you over the shoulder and tells you, say, hey, you know what? Azure seems to be down because I'm seeing news articles or alerts everywhere that people are complaining that Azure is actually unavailable. Now, once you see anything like that, you don't immediately panic. One of the first things that you need to do is first take a look at the global Azure status dashboard to see what is the status of availability. And the next thing that you would do is whether that outage affects your Azure enrollment or Azure subscription. Because mind you, and we always tell customer this, is that not all customers are affected by certain outages. So the only way that you can find out is if you monitor or if you take a look at your Service Health. And you use Azure Service Health to do exactly that. So Service Health is a personalized dashboard. The fastest way to access this is go to aka.ms/Azure Service Health. It's the same URL for everyone, but this URL will actually redirect you to your Azure portal. It will ask you for your username and your password. And the thing that you will see in the portal immediately from logging in is the Service Health dashboard. So it will provide you with information such as service issues, plant maintenance, and health advisories. This is also where you receive guidance and reports, like in the rare cases where, for example, or Microsoft needs to shut down a significant number of resources that affects your virtual machines, for example. You can also see what support and guidance you can get from us in those cases. You can also set up targeted notifications. Like for example, alerting your teams via emails or text messages in case something goes down. And you can share details and updates easily because you can download details and report and uptime or downtime reports via PDF. So to access Microsoft Azure Service Health, just look for Service Health. And then once you click on the Service Health button, the first thing that you will see is a global view of all of the Azure services. So this is worldwide across all 54 regions. And this view will tell you whether there are any services that are currently down from a worldwide perspective. But the thing is, again, like I said a while ago, the more important thing is that you need to find out whether, if there is an outage, whether you are affected or not. So you can see here, what are the different active events or events that are currently happening right now? Are there service issues? Are there planned maintenance? Or are there advisories. A health advisory is basically something that Azure is asking for you to do that is not necessarily downtime related. So if you take a look at the details, you can see here a tracking ID of the said incident. If that incident affects your subscription or affects the services that you are using, what are the impacted services, what are the regions, and what's the latest updates for the service. If you want to track this issue on mobile, there's a QR code in there. You will need the Azure the Azure app on your mobile phone, when on mobile on iPad, sorry, iOS or Android, so that to keep track of this issue while the engineering team is fixing it, you will get alerted on the latest alerts. And if you really want to give someone a report as to what's happening, you can download that in PDF as well. You can filter service alerts according to region. Of course, your service may only be deployed on certain regions, so it may make a lot of sense to filter alerts or service outages per region. You don't want to see service outages in a region that doesn't actually run your workload. You can filter, you can pin filter world map to your dashboard. So you can see, in this case, this little world map right here to show you which regions are actually affected. You can do health history, so previous service issues, previous service outages or planned maintenance that affects your subscription. Again, you can see it here. Again, make a selection from the list here to look at the details. Resource Health will show you what are the different resources you currently have in your subscription, and it will give you in a very easily understandable visual cue. So green means go, yellow means there's a problem or warning, and red means there is a service reliability issue on the resource that you're currently using. Okay, that's another view of Resource Health. You can also create a service health alert. So for example, there are no issues found, but you'd like to be alerted when something happens. So create a service alert. You can configure what are the alert conditions, what subscription, what type of services, which region, what is the criteria, enter a name of your alert, and then create an action group name. Like you may add other users. You may add other users to your alert in case that thing happens. All of those users will be alerted as well. Okay, add action group. So you can select sending an email, triggering an Azure function, triggering a webhook to, for example, trigger something on SharePoint. So service health alerts are proactive notifications to inform you of any service issues that you may care about that is specific to a subscription, services, or region. So an example here is you can, like I mentioned a while ago, sending an email to your dev team or resource if a subscription that's specifically being used by this team is impacted. So you can do it. You can go down to the description or to the resource level. You don't want to alert everyone of everything, so you might want to be careful about filtering the alerts to certain individuals or groups only. You can send a specific SMS. We do have our own SMS gateway, so we don't charge you for outgoing SMS. Okay, a very useful tool is also the Azure mobile app. There are two versions of this. Of course, one is for the iOS and one is for the Android device. So this is an app that allows you to keep up with your Azure resources. It has a scaled down version of the Azure portal. And if you were paying attention a while ago, it also has the Cloud Shell where you can run PowerShell to run specific PowerShell commands if need be. You don't actually need to go to a PC to do all of this because you can run this on a mobile app. You can access your resources everywhere. You can run a summarized version of you can monitor each of your resources. Like in this example, you're monitoring how a virtual machine is currently performing. You can review your metrics for your most critical resources, and you can even tag certain resources or certain subscriptions as your favorites for quick access. You don't necessarily have to constantly take a look at your Azure app as you would for your Facebook or your Instagram, but definitely, if something goes wrong, you can configure an alert, and then this alert will be popping up as toast notifications or in-application notifications in your Azure mobile app. You can also do diagnosis and fixing issues quickly. So you can create quick actions in your Azure resources, such as, for example, very common is restarting virtual machines or restarting web apps, running very simple scripts that you can enter in a mobile phone to run certain commands to fix quick problems without the access of a PC. Cloud Shell again, Cloud Shell is also included in the mobile app, so you can run PowerShell commands to run certain automations or to execute certain things that a portal cannot simply do, or you may have difficulty doing using a portal. All right, so that's all the time that we have. But before we end this webinar, I'd like to give you a few reminders. You can still get your Azure free account by going to azure.com/free. Now, once you have entered your personal details, you can get $200 of credit that you can spend. This is free credit, by the way. Your credit card will not be charged. There's also available 12 months of popular free services, and there are 25 services that are always free. These are the services that are available that are going to be given to you for each month for an entire year. So you have access to 750 hours of Linux virtual machine compute, as well as 750 hours of Windows virtual machines, and so on and so forth. This is just a quick visualization of all of the other services that are available as part of the Azure free credits that you can use within the 12 months as your trial is still ongoing. Now, once you have exceeded the limits of all of the other services, that's the only time where your $200 credit becomes used. And once your $200 credit becomes close to zero, you will get a friendly email from Microsoft to remind you that your credit is low. So it will ask you whether you want to continue to use the service and this time charging your credit card, or you want to be connected to a local Microsoft partner who can then bill you so that you can continue using your Azure and as well as use the services of that partner to help you along your cloud journey, your Azure adoption. If you want to learn at your own pace, there is always Microsoft Learn. Um, it's a long URL, but remember this URL, aka.ms/learn. All of the learning courses that you would need to learn Azure from all the way from Azure fundamentals to Azure architecture, which are some of the advanced courses. Power BI courses are also here. Microsoft 365, Office 365, as well as Dynamics courses, and even Power BI and Power Apps. Everything that you need to learn to be able to use all of these tools and become experts, as well as preparing for certification exams, can be found on Microsoft Learn. And like I said, and let me emphasize this, these are all for free. All you need to have is a PC with an internet connection, a good set of earphones or headphones, and time. So make good use of the time that we have in order for us to upskill ourselves for what's needed to in this new world. And you can actually select the different training courses based on the roles that you have. So if you are, for example, aspiring to become a data scientist, click on the data science, select the data scientist in the drop down, and the Microsoft Learn will actually select the courses that is appropriate for the role that you want, all the way from basic all the way to the advanced courses. There's also a specific learning site just for you to become an AI expert. It's called aischool.microsoft.com. This is, for example, where you can go to learn the basics of AI, AI in the business context, how AI is used in government context, and also in different industries such as manufacturing, retail, financial services, and education. Not only that, but it also gives you technical training, free technical training on how to build, for example, AI applications that uses our chatbot capabilities, our cognitive services capabilities, and all of the cloud-based and cloud-powered AI capabilities, and even Azure machine learning you can learn from this site. And again, this is absolutely free. Complete documentation is on Microsoft Docs. So the cloud adoption framework, for instance, is on the Microsoft Docs site. So just go to docs.microsoft.com, select Azure from the selection, and all of the documentation that you need is already there. This is going to be your new best friend if you start on your Azure journey, especially in the beginning. Combine this with Microsoft Learn. These are two very powerful resources to help you to help you get your technical skills to get your cloud journey going. All right, now we are at the end of our webinar. I think we are making good on time. This is the schedule of our next webinars, and you can see the URL there at the bottom where you can register for these webinars. If you're interested in any of these topics, please do visit the URL at the bottom and register there. It also includes links to the previous recordings of this webinar. So for example, if you miss parts or the entirety of this webinar, you can just go back to the this aka.ms URL and then listen to the webinar on demand. All right, now that's the time that we have for today. Thank you very much for spending what is close to an hour with us to understand the topic of today's webinar. If you like if you like these formats of learning, like on-demand webinars or live webinars, please do register to in our future webinars. And then if you have any questions, feel free to drop me a note at hhermida@microsoft.com. So once again, thank you very much for spending your hour with us, and I hope you've learned something new today. Thank you.